Good morning. Welcome to the A Window into Northern Ghana project. This is an initiative of the active youth that seeks to bring closer to the young people, the sons and daughters of the region who are doing very well, to help inspire and prepare young people towards the journeys to becoming today's leaders and tomorrow's leaders. So this is our first episode, and we're going to be engaging with one of the really inspiring young people from Northern region to explore, learn a lot about his works and himself, just so to inspire young people, to ensure that they're able to make better decisions, to ensure that they become greater people than the person going to be interviewing here. So actually, before I come to let you know what I'm going to talk about here, I just want to tell you a little bit about him. So this person is someone who is very interested in letting people have an experience that he never had, like letting people have an experience that he wish he had when he was young. And for that reason, he has brought up so many initiatives within the region just to help young people, especially children, have that particular experience. He's actually an artist, an international artist who has won so many awards internationally and have his works installed all around the world. Unfortunately, he was actually named the 73rd most influential African. This person we're talking about today is no other person than Mr. Ibrahim Mahama. So on the first edition of the Window into Northern Ghana project, I'm going to be talking with Mr. Ibrahim Mahama. He's the founder of Savanna Centre for Contemporary Arts and Nkrumah Voli-ni. So audience have welcomed Ibrahim Mahama. Mr. Mahama.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Mahama, good morning.
Good morning.
Okay. Like I said, this is going to be a very interactive session. We have audience here. Yes. So ask some questions, and at a point, allow them to ask. But I'm very sure we are live on Facebook, so if you're watching us, there is a point you can actually join the discussion. So also listening, if you have any questions, any concerns, leave it on the page for us. I know those people who are watching will want to know much about you. So who is Ibrahim Mahama?
Well, thank you. I think we need more initiatives like this, across the board. I was born here, actually, 87, but I didn't grow up here. I grew up in Accra.
Okay.
Yeah. In
87, that's 32 years?
Yes. So we went to Accra when I was barely 2 years old. So I've studied in the south. I went to primary school. They were all Catholic schools. Went to secondary school in Koforidua, Pope John. I did visual arts there. And then I went to tech afterwards, Nkrumah University, in 2006, where I did my Bachelor of Fine Arts in painting and sculpture. But I specialized in painting. I know in Ghana, when you say you are doing painting, the first thing that someone asks is, can you paint me or can you draw me?
Yeah, actually, I want to say that.
So I did painting. Then I went back to the university in 2011 after I completed 2010 to do the master's again in painting. Then I finished it in 2013.
So that means entirely your educational, your educational journey, you had everything in art.
Yes, even my PhD, I went back to do painting.
So like, how was childhood, and at what point did you realize that it was art for you? When did you make that decision? Because many times it's very difficult for young people to actually be able to identify that one thing they want to do. At that point, did you realize that, it is art for me?
Well, for me, I don't think when I was a child I wanted to be an artist. I used to draw.
Okay.
And for me, that was a way of escaping the world. Yeah, because when I was young, I was in boarding school. I went to boarding school at the age of 5. So there's a school in Savanna. It's called Prince Wati. When the bypass wasn't done, each time you were going with STC or whatever, you pass in front of the school. So my brothers and I were in that school until I was moved to another school, St. John's Preparatory in Achimota. So we're there for like 7 years. So within that period, I was very unhappy. And the only way I could make myself happy.
I mean, what brought about that?
But why would you send your child to boarding school at the age of 5 years old? Like, I was very unhappy. Like, I was always crying. Yeah. I think I was always saying that, you know those cartoons, Tom and Jerry, when they cry and the tears are flowing like a fountain. That's how I used to cry in those days. So the drawing was one of those things that helped me. It made me feel at peace. So I did so much drawing, even when we were doing, let's say, maths class or science or whatever. I wouldn't concentrate in class, and all I would be doing is I'll turn the paper or whatever, even the exam, and I'll be drawing at the back of it. So my grades were not so good in other subjects, but somehow the drawing made up for it. So by the time I was going to secondary school, and it was interesting that I could get maybe D or C in every subject, but when it came to drawing, I was always first in class. So my father was like, but maybe you should go and do art in secondary school.
Your father actually proposed?
Yeah, my father proposed it. And I was like, but even the school I was going to, Koforidua, at the time, because I didn't choose it as my first choice. My first choice was St. Peter's. But St. Peter's didn't offer visual arts. And Pope John offered visual arts. So one of my older brothers, Majid, he was already there and he was in his final year. So my father said, okay, maybe if you go there also, your brother will protect you, things like that. So in order for me to get admission into Pope John also wouldn't admit me because they said I didn't choose their school as a first choice. And plus, the visual arts class was full. There was only one class for visual arts.
So I want to understand, was it your father that, was it his proposal that actually made you accept that you wanted to do arts?
Yeah, you know, in the beginning it was quite hard because everyone thought, everyone thought I was a strange one in the family. So because each time I went for excursion and I had money, I would buy strange objects like artifacts and things like that. So I always loved the idea that people would do things with their hands, you know, things like that. So when my father said, okay, why not, let's try it. And eventually, even when I went to secondary school, they didn't give me the visual arts. I was reading general arts because that was what was available. The visual arts class was full. But when I met the headmaster one day, he told me, if you can find someone in the visual arts class who wants to swap with you, if you bring him to my office, I'll make the change. So I went there to announce, and I went back to the general arts class. And one day I was in the class, and one boy came and said he doesn't want to be in the visual arts class anymore. And I was like, I'm sure those rowdy boys, they are making you uncomfortable. So we went together to the headmaster's office, and that was it. That was the day I went into this direction. Yeah. And my father was very excited actually, because even it was very difficult getting that admission at that time, because even when they gave me the admission, there's one funny story. When the admission letter came, the name, instead of Ibrahim Mahama, they had done it Ibrahim Yirinchi. So it was very hard. We had to send a letter back to the school, and it took another month. So by the time I went to school, it was like 2 weeks to vacation. Yeah.
Oh, this is interesting. I asked this question because many times parents, try to force their children to read courses that they actually. So it's very interesting to know that your father actually realized that aspect of you and pushed that you would do that. That's very, very interesting.
You know, the thing is that I'm not the first child. I'm like my father has 10 kids, and I'm number 9.
Okay.
So two of my older brothers, one is a doctor, he's in Cuba. The 2 of them are engineers. So, like, really, this guy can do anything he wants to do. You know, you've already ticked the boxes.
So, okay, so are you trying to, because of your condition, that particular thing was acceptable. So you think if someone is the firstborn, secondborn, those options shouldn't be explored? Is that what you're saying?
No, not that. I think that sometimes in unique circumstances, for instance, if you come from a family where there are older people who are already doing well, it's much easier for you to accept that maybe your last child wants to do something which doesn't conform so well.
This is true, but people are watching, and I want us to be very clear on this. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, for me, I think that if you have a child, you should just allow them to explore. I think in the case of my father, he was just interested in the fact that maybe I had an interest in it, and he thought that I had potential in it. So he helped me to push it in that direction. But I also like to joke that maybe with the benefit of hindsight, if I could go back in the past and look at my father and read him, maybe I would like to think that because he had other older children who were already doing, like my sisters were doing law and other things. So at the end of the day, you don't really need to stress one of your last children about they becoming engineers or doctors or whatever.
That's interesting. Actually, I think it's enough of that. Later, if there are any other things that people want to know.
Yeah.
But I wanted to look at your journey as an artist. So, professionally, when did it all start? Was it 10 years? I mean, when did it all start for you as an artist?
Well, I think when you're in art school, mostly you are not really sure what you want to do, you know, whether you really want to become an artist or not sometimes, you know.
So what are some of the things that you could be thinking of becoming as an art student?
Well, you can become a curator,
Okay.
you can become a collector, you can become an art dealer, technician. There's so many things that you can do if you're studying art. Because the thing about studying art is that it allows you to be sensitive in multiple ways. To look at the world in ways that ordinarily people don't look at the world in as such. So for me, when I was in art school, I was very much interested in experimenting with ideas and forms. So if you look at the early works that I have, they range from drawings to sculptures to paintings to a lot of different things. I guess it was during my master's that I really came to understand the fact that I wanted to do art and practice art fully. And yeah. It took quite a while for me to get there.
Okay.
Yeah.
But one of the things that, this is actually very, very interesting, right? And I'm very sure people are already enjoying so much. But I want to know, because this part of the world, where people think, art is not actually a very lucrative profession to go into. People believe there are less opportunities out there for artists. How did you, at what point did the door open for you as an artist?
Well, you know, I think it's a misconception in the beginning about what art is even. Because everyone, as I said in the beginning, when you tell someone you're an artist or you're a painter, the first question they'll ask you is, can you paint me? But you don't necessarily need to be a painter who makes like paintings in a traditional sense. When I was doing my master's, I was beginning to experiment a lot with different materials. There was a series of projects I did between 2012 and 13, and there were some international curators who saw those projects and they made some recommendations. There was a residency I went to do in London in 2013, and then also my work was proposed for an exhibition in London. It's like one of the biggest museums in the world. And that was it. Once I traveled, I got there, I interacted with people. Because art is also not so much about what you do. It's also about what comes out from your mouth, your head, your ideas, how you think, how you relate to ideas, people, and all that. So when I went and I started having conversations with people, doing workshops, I used to go to schools in London, primary schools, teaching, showing kids things here and there. At that time, I hadn't started building all of this. This was much later, in 2015. So in 2013, I was already building the foundation for it by trying to spread the ideas that I had. So those ideas are the things that sold my work. Because when people look at the object in terms of the painting, they are more interested in what's behind it. It's not so much about just because you've done something beautiful, but they are more interested in what's the message behind it, the concept, and also what it does to the world.
Wow, this is very interesting. Actually, aside you being known as an artistic legend, I think you also have out of the world boldness, dragging planes all the way from Accra to Tamale. Is that parts of you as an artist, or can you tell us more about this particular attribute of yourself? Like, you have this out of the world boldness, dragging planes all the way from. It's not everyone, just a few people who. Actually, I think it's the first time that was done.
Yeah.
Like, tell us a bit about that.
You know, when you become an artist, there is one thing that you have to accept, that you are not going to conform to the rules of society. And that's what makes anyone an artist. If someone says, I'm an artist, it means that one, the person is a visionary. Secondly, it means that the person has probably seen something in the world that we have not seen. So artists are more or less, maybe you can describe an artist as light. somehow guiding maybe a certain path in a way that humanity can relook at itself or can relook at life or the world itself. So if you have an idea and then you want to do it as an artist, you cannot relate, you can't bring that idea back down to common sense. I think the world, a lot of people live in the world based on common sense. They say, oh, but you cannot do this and that and that. It doesn't make sense. But it's not common sense that rules the world. If we leave the world to common sense, the world will actually be destroyed. Yeah, because common sense doesn't really do much for us. Sometimes we need to dwell on philosophy. Sometimes we need to go back to proverbs. And our society has a lot of that already. There are a lot of proverbs that you hear. It doesn't really make sense. You're like, but what's this thing about that they are talking about? But those things actually inspire us to think differently. So when I saw the airplanes in Accra, for instance, I remember I was living in Germany for 1 year. There was a program, this really famous program for artists, the DAD scholarship. So whilst I was there, you know, because when you're in Europe, it's much easier to travel around the world. Because if you're going to Brazil, for instance, in the olden days, Ghana Airways existed. You could fly from Ghana straight to Brazil. But now you have to fly from Ghana all the way to France or wherever before you go. So if you are in Europe, it's much easier to access the rest of the world. So I really took advantage of it. And I traveled extensively. I saw a lot of different museums, went to schools, gave lectures, talks, projects, workshops, all kinds of things. I went to India, like a lot of places. So when I came, like when I was coming back, I said to myself, but there's so much that I've seen out there which is so promising. But here maybe it's possible that we can borrow some of those ideas and then we can apply it. I went to Kotoka and I saw these airplanes and I was like, oh, some of these workshops that we've been planning or doing, maybe it's possible that we can actually convert the interior of the airplane into a classroom. It was just based on a thought. And then based on that, I was like, oh, let me just see what happens. I started writing applications, blah, blah, blah. It took about 3 years. But eventually, when I brought the airplanes here, it's only recently that we started this workshop. So between the conception of the idea and then the realization, there's so much time within it. But because we mostly dwell on common sense, if you want to start that thing in society and you start and it's not working out, people say, oh, but you see, we told you that it will not work. But you being an artist, you know, you've seen it in your head. In manifestation, it's like time travel. You've already seen it happen before you start doing it. It's not that you are now trying your luck or something. It's for you, the reality is that it exists already. So that reality will guide you, and no matter what, whether you are deemed, people say you are stupid or foolish or whatever, you still push through and then make it happen. Yeah.
There is a lot goes. I mean, it's not just about what we see, the drawings. I mean, it goes far beyond that. It takes a lot of dissemination, creative thinking, innovation to be an artist. Interesting. Yeah. But Mr. Mahama, I want us to come back because actually you've traveled the world. You've mentioned a lot about some of the countries that you've gone, some of the works you did out there. I just want to know why. I mean, someone going out, getting all these opportunities, will not want to come back to town. I mean, coming back to establish Savanna Centre for Contemporary Art, Red Clay, Nkrumah, Voli-ni, and I know there are still a lot more projects in the pipeline. What is the reason behind leaving, I mean, the States and coming down to Tamale, not being an Accra, coming down to Tamale to start all this?
Yeah, there is, you know, there was an exhibition we did in Accra a couple of years ago, KNUST, and the title was "The Gown Must Go to Town," and the title was taken from Kwame Nkrumah's inaugural speech at Legon when the students were graduating, and then he said that, I think it is time for the gown to go to town. Yeah, but we said the gown must go to town. We made it imperative, like the gown must go to town. I think Africa, the African continent has always been in a certain state of crisis. People, when you find yourself within a certain state of crisis, the easy thing is to abandon it. Yeah, so for instance, studying here after the undergrad, and deciding to study here to do the masters, and deciding to do for instance, to do the PhD here. It was very deliberate. People always think that, oh, if I travel to America and I go and study, then it makes me a much better person. No, it doesn't actually. When you live in a place, so for instance, when you live in a place like this, in a crisis, and you are studying, there are things that you encounter that makes you a lot more sensitive to the conditions here. Even if you look at these situations politically, like sometimes when you find people who have studied abroad and say, oh, let's bring this person to come and head this department, mostly they miss a lot of things. They miss out on a lot of things. Whilst you are within the thing itself and you are struggling, that's when actually the revolution is born out of it. The revolution is not born because you've gone and then you've come back. It's within the struggle that you actually find a solution to the problem that you're dealing with. So for me, getting job opportunities to teach around the world or to live elsewhere, to live around the world. Because when I finished the German program, I had a chance to live in Germany actually and get a passport, but it didn't make any sense to me. At the end of the day, if you're looking back down here, because ordinarily if a young person or an artist or whoever, a scientist is working, I like to think about it from the point of art because I think artists actually have a lot more freedom than most professions. So if you're an artist who is practicing and for instance, you're making money out of your work, the money that you're making out of it, I don't see it as profit, I see it as material. How can that material come back and transform the society that you find yourself in? That's where the true success is. The success is not that the artist has sold a painting for 1 million. The success is that when the artist sold a painting for 1 million, that 1 million changed the narrative. And then now, in the future, there are kids who will not need to grow up to the level of the artist in order to be able to ask those questions that the artist was asking when he was at their age.
Talking about the fact that having your, master's degree, master's level education here was very deliberate. I'm talking about the fact that when you live with the people, you get to, that's when the revolution actually comes. That's when you get to actually see what the problem is and what needs to be done. I want to know, what did you see that made you think that, red clay is the best solution? What did you see that made you think that SCCA, Savanna Centre, has the best solution? What did you see that made you think that Nkrumah and all the other projects in the pipeline is what needs to be done? What did you see?
Well, Ghana was at a certain golden age in the 60s, in the early 60s and late 50s, when after a post-independence era, Kwame Nkrumah started building a lot of really important projects. The Nkrumah Voli is one of those spaces. There were factories. All these archives that you see were actually born out of the post-independence era. Some of these were born within the colonial period, like the British railroads, the early slippers, the wood that was used in building the railroads for extracting raw materials. But beyond that, there's potential. And Ghana has always had that potential. So when I was in school, I used to go around old factories like that, collecting materials and using it for the work. So already I knew that there was so much potential within this place. And also, of course, I didn't grow up in Tamale, but I used to spend my holidays here. And we used to go around. Of course, if you see general images of Tamale, it's not so interesting, So I always said to myself, it can be quite interesting if we can somehow flip this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Utilizing the potential.
Yeah.
What are these potentials you're thinking about?
The potentials, the potential is not something that exists. It's not something that exists. That's why. So the potential is it's an imagination. It's a certain reality that exists in your head that you have to see first and foremost. You have to look at the landscape and imagine that, it's just the way that business people, but I don't think in a business-wise or entrepreneur, but if the way business people think, someone can look at a piece of land and say, but if I build this business here, maybe I can capitalize, blah, blah, blah. There's another form of imagination also that breeds that. So you can look at the landscape and say, this is what the existing narrative is. But I imagine that if we were to do this and that, it would change it based on the potentials that existed. And the potential I'm talking about in Ghana is not a new potential. This is an already existing potential based on, even let's just use the Nkrumah Voli as a starting point. In the 60s, when Kwame Nkrumah founded the African Union together with a few other African countries, at the time, the point was to build to industrialize the continent to a point where we wouldn't have to rely on Europe anymore for aid, blah, blah, blah. But the post, 66, after 66, we went back to that. We were taking loans, we were, through the structural adjustment program, we had to privatize a lot of state resources. And me buying the Nkrumah Voli is actually a legacy of the structural adjustment program still. That we can take, let's say, a collective space, a public space, and we can just privatize it. Say that, oh, so and so should buy it, and then he should turn it into a business. But the reason why I bought the Nkrumah Voli was because I wanted to prove a point that the building had truly had a potential. It truly had a potential. Because now when you go under the building and you see what it is, you would have never imagined, let's say, a couple of years ago that Nkrumah Voli would be what it is right
Alex,
now.
I know a lot of people are watching. They actually doesn't know what Nkrumah Voli was, what it is now. If you could share some.
This is, okay, so this is Nkrumah Voli. Okay. So this is Nkrumah Voli. And it was flooded.
Before?
Yeah.
Or now?
No, this is like an image. I took this picture 1 year ago when we initially pumped the water out of it because there was a lot of water stored in it over years and also a lot of mud because the municipality had poured sand into it to seal off the building because no one wanted to really confront the building for what it was. So I had to work with the guys in the area to excavate the whole space to get it to now. And so you see the sand and other things that were in it. But there was so much water in it initially.
Interesting. So I mean, what do you intend to do with this building? Like you said, initially it was meant to help store food, organics. Like, so what do you intend to do with it? Are you also going to use it to store products? Or, I mean, what do you actually intend to do with this building now?
Well, initially it was built as a food storage, but you can't use it for storing food now. I think I see it more or less a container of memories and ideas, forms and all that. So initially, you know, when you study the universe, like the sun, black holes and all that, how like stars collapse and then they form these event horizons and all that. I imagine that the Nkrumah Voli was that it was like a collapsing star, and at the center of it, if you found a way to go through the event horizon, it will lead you to other universes and all that. And so all these sand that we had to excavate from the bottom was very important. I thought that it would allow us to somehow look into other things. We have a lot of archaeological findings from the north, actually from the Coma region and many other places, which have never been shown here. They've always been in the south or in Europe, in the British Museum or other places. It was one thing we were looking at, which we're going to present in the Nkrumah Voli now. We took a loan from the Ghana Museum of the first satellite that was sent to space by the Soviet, the Sputnik, which the vaccine is named after. We brought it here. It's actually here, which we're going to install in the building. We have an Egyptian coffin dating back 4,000 years and a mummy, which is going to be there. We have video works, light installations. We have drawings and paintings.
So generally you're going to have all these things installed in Coma?
Yes.
So people can come around?
Yes.
Okay.
Just as they do with Red Clay and SEC.
Okay. Yeah, so I think at the beginning we didn't mention, so we currently have one of the art centers. This is Red Clay. You can see the background, very beautiful one. I think you mentioned some of the things that we have here, a lot of historical items, some of which you may look at and think it's useless, but when he talks about it, you tend to see how useful it is. Yeah, so like I said, it's so a window into northern Ghana initiative. This is actually an initiative of the Active Youth, a youth radio program on Diamond FM. This is one of the initiatives we want to explore the sons and daughters of the region. I think this is going to be very surprising to Mr. Mahama. So this is our first episode. We're going to have more people who are actually doing well like him to actually learn from their works and from the personal life, just to ensure that young people are able to learn better to help them with their journeys towards becoming today's leaders and tomorrow's leaders. Yeah, so we're going to continue. At some point, like I said, I'll give you the chance so you can ask your questions. So if you're also watching us live on Facebook, you can leave your comments. Currently with Mr. Mahama, a visual artist. Sure, you're from Ghana? Yeah, I thought, because he's an artist from everywhere, but originally we own him, so he's an artist from Ghana and from Tamale. So, let's continue our discussion. I think we're done with Nkrumah, but we have 3 different centers in Tamale. I think Red Clay is the newest.
Yes. No, Nkrumah will be the newest, but Red Clay opened last year.
Okay.
Yes, in September last year.
Okay. Yeah. So I think I mentioned about some planes, dragon planes to Tamale, especially to Red Clay. What exactly, generally, what exactly is happening at Red Clay? I think we've already explored what's happening at Nkrumah. What exactly what exactly does Red Clay look like, and what is happening here?
Let me find an image of Red Clay, a drone image, so that we can. Okay. So this is an image of Red Clay. From the top, you have this building at the back, which we are still yet to complete. You have these accommodation blocks, which are going to be used as residency spaces for artists, engineers, architects, like students alike. When it's completed, it will have about 19, I think about 18 rooms. We have this cinema hall here, which we're building when it's done. We have a library here. We have the Parliament of Ghosts here. And then we have the main gallery space here. And then there's an accommodation block here. And this is where we are currently. And then you have this new block that we are thinking about building, and then we have the airplanes. The land, this doesn't constitute the entire land. The entire land is more than 100 acres. This part of the land is only about, let's say, 10 acres or less. So much of the land is still around that you see in the space. But I started building this space in 2015. This is an initial picture of it. So it was a small building. And I was building it as a place just to, as a studio, an artist studio, a place just to live and to work. But as time went on, I realized that there was a potential, because unlike SCCA was also built from scratch. So this was the land originally when we started, so it opened. So unlike SCCA, which was in the middle of town, this one was more outside town. And there was potential, because the time I bought the land here, there was not a single house in the area, not a single house. It was all, and this was how many years ago? Like, I bought the land in 2014. Yeah, and at the time the land was very cheap. A plot of land here was 900 cedis, but today it's like more than 10,000. So at the time so I bought it was 2.5 acres. So when I started building this, and later on I realized that maybe there's potential. I started talking to the chief. I showed an initial image. I started talking to the chief here and people around about buying land which they had actually demarcated and left for like institutional projects and things like that. You know how things function here. If they demarcate land for an institution and the government doesn't come and build the institution, they will just cut it up again and then use it for. So I started raising money and buying land which was meant for farms, industrial areas, institutions, blah, 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 so that we could preserve the land. So even if you are looking in the next 100 years, this land will still be here. Because when you look at the chieftaincy situation here, they demarcate a land, and then in the next 2 years, the entire village is sold off. So future generations don't even have any space for recreation parks and things like that. So it really got me thinking. I said, oh, maybe it's possible that we can expand the institution beyond what it is as a studio. Because one expects that an artist studio is a place where the artist goes to paint, draw, and produce objects. But it's also possible that the artist studio can be a place where ideas are produced, knowledge is produced, experiences are produced. It can be a place where actually a place of ideological transformation within, let's say, a community or something like that. So we started looking at expansion.
Actually, when you look around, I think this is one of the proudest things people of Tamale can boast of. I think it's one of the things that we are so very proud to have. But have you met your expectations for putting up SCCA, professional vertically? Have you met your expectations? And what are some of the lessons you learned throughout this process?
I don't think we've even started actually.
You've not started meeting your expectations?
No. I've not even started. The ideas and dreams that I have, this is nothing close to it.
So what is the expectation? What do you expect to get from all of this?
Well, it's certainly not money. Because if I wanted to make money, I don't think I would even think about coming to Tamale. So it's more or less about ideas, you know, as I said before. A lot of young people tend to think that in order to build a legacy, you have to be older. So they think that in their youthful life, they have to enjoy. No, but sometimes you don't know. A lot of young people die these days. You can die at any point in time. So whatever thing that you want to do, you can start at any age. So for me, I'm thinking that we can build, let's say, an art school, an engineering school, something like an MIT here in the future. We're going to be building like industrial complexes here for producing materials like building materials like bricks, because the idea is also to influence the architecture here in the north, the type of materials and all that. I started collecting these smokes a couple of years ago, about 7 years ago. And the basic idea of collecting the smokes were that I was interested in the history of smoke making, but the history of cotton making to begin with. Because a lot of the early smokes were done with cotton, but now we don't produce cotton anymore. Even when you go to the Nkrumah Voli, not far from it, a Champon was building the cotton factory, which was also abandoned and was sold. So how can we intervene within these systems? So when you buy land, that's what it allows you to do. You can intervene. So by building, let's say, growing cotton and building, let's say, a cotton plantation, it gives us the chance to be able to, let's say, intervene within, let's say, even the tradition of smoke itself. Because all we do with the smoke material, when we weave, all we do is to make smokes with it. But why can't we make carpets with them? Why can't we make curtains with them? Why can't we make sheets with them? There is so much that can be done with the material. So the idea is that by building an institution, it allows you to be able to evolve whatever there is within the society at a particular time. So the aim of the institution, or all of this that I'm doing, is that it can multiply itself and then be able to feed into the society in a way that it will change the culture over time.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, so it's still a Window into Northern Ghana program. I'm actually calling it still a Window into Northern Ghana show on the active youth. So if you're watching us live, like I said, put all your questions there, concerns, any recommendations, leave them there. We're going to be looking at them later. And to you, the audience, we're coming to you for some questions. So if you have questions for Mr. Mahama, I think in the next, after 2 questions, I'll come to you for those things. But Mr. Mahama, I want to come back to you. This is in Northern Ghana. I think you just spoke a little about the smokes. That's one of the things that makes us Northerners, one of the things that we identified with. But where actually does the center sit in the history of Tamale, in the history of Northern Ghana? Where exactly does the center fit when it comes to the history of Tamale, Northern Ghana?
Yeah, I don't think it's within one particular time. I think the space is somehow, I wouldn't say it's lost in time, but it's not within one particular time zone. It's not of the past, neither is it of the future. Yeah, it borrows different elements. So I'm very much interested in tradition. I'm very much interested in history. So I collect objects, materials, stories, or like anything that I can get my hands on. But I'm also, institutional building is very important to me. I'm not interested in building, I don't know, I'm not interested in building a house or whatever. I think that by building institutions, it allows us to be able to at least resituate the times that we live in. Strong institutions. I think that has always been the biggest problems that we've had on the continent, because people rather would invest money into building, let's say, individual family legacies or whatever. But if you're able to build strong institutions, it doesn't only affect whatever your children or grandchildren, but it affects the society in a whole. And if it affects the society in a whole, it comes back even to your own lineage in a way, because if...
and that's a legacy, right? Because you're remembered for that.
Yeah, not just you're remembered for that, but the legacy is that it changes the fabric of the society. And for me, I think that's where the point is, that the fact that the society evolves beyond itself. So for instance, 2 days ago, I was watching TV with my father. We were watching CNN, and they were showing, I think it was more than 2 days ago, when the first day, when the rover that they sent to Mars, NASA, they flew a helicopter on Mars, and this is the first helicopter that's like an aerial vehicle that has been flown on another planet, and it's a big deal. It's like when we got the first gravitational wave or the image of a black hole or something. They are big things. But we are teaching kids here in the airplanes, like with the drone classes, blah, blah, blah. And some of the people say, oh, last time a man came here and said, oh, but why are you doing all of this? Like, you should convert the airplane into restaurants, into a nightclub, things like that. It's because our thinking never really goes so far. But we have to imagine that our society can be much more than it is. These kids, what if tomorrow some of these kids decide that they want to become astrophysicists or whatever? Humanity has always struggled with the universe. Maybe through ideas like this, because when knowledge becomes so common, you never know. There are kids who are probably in like Zabzugu or something. They have the potential to be those that will create, for instance, a warp drive that will allow us to travel outside of our outside this universe. But we don't know if they don't have those opportunities or those imaginations. So by investing into building strong institutions and creating possibilities, you begin to open up the world and other possibilities that will be presented in it. And you don't have to know it. You just have to be someone who creates that opportunity and allows it to flow. Yeah.
Wow. Very interesting. Generally, I know, I mean, the whole experience is going to actually help influence the thinking of the children. To help them make better choices. Personally, if you don't see something, if you don't have the opportunity to actually experience something, there's no way you can think about it. You think about something, like if you had the opportunity to experience it, if you had the opportunity to see it, you have the opportunity to think so much around that, so you can actually be able to make more decisions in relation to that. But generally, like I think at the beginning I mentioned, especially this side, there is this perception people have about art. For that reason, a lot of people discourage students or children from going into the arts. I mean, going to study arts or being an artist. SCCA is here, Red Clay is here, we are here, we have you. How do you intend to use these institutions to change that, I mean, perception people have about art, or to actually change that narrative in the northern region, so that probably in the next years we're going to have more artists, people's people's perception about arts will change to the extent that a child will propose reading medicine, and a parent will say that, I think I see so much of art in when we read art. How do you intend to use these institutions and yourself, because you're one of the art sets we have, to actually change that narrative?
I think it's already somehow changing, because sometimes I see some parents bring their children here for them to come and we teach them drawing, and some of them are like maybe doctors or engineers, like the owner of Havana or something, the doctor. He brings his children here every weekend for drawing classes and things like that. I think it's changing. There's a shift because people want to...
So how do you want to contribute to that change? Because I believe it's not where we want it to be. There are still a lot more people out there.
Yes, it's a gradual process. Change doesn't happen in a short time. Sometimes it takes a millennium for change to happen. So when you start something, you just need to see it through slowly. There are artworks, for instance, let me see, these images. There are some of the artworks which I've made, which have been in museums around the world. This was, these two were in London, the previous two were in London and Brazil. This was in Ukraine. These are ordinary. Secondly, this was in Chicago, 2019. Chicago. This was in Italy, in a town called Brescia. It's currently in France, in Ube. This was in Germany, in Berlin. This was in Manchester, the Parliament of Ghosts. In London and in East Lands in Michigan. This was in Australia last year. So the idea is that this was in Congo, actually, these coffins that I made. This was in Belgium, in Antwerp. This was in Venice, in Italy, in 2019. Accra, Jamestown, Germany, Bugulushi, so that's small. So the idea is that by having an institution, if you build imagine you had an art school, which all these works were like a permanent gift to the collection. Because the kind of works, the works that are produced over time, these works are really expensive. They are really expensive, and there are museums around the world. So if you build an institution like this and you gift the work to it, in the next 10 years, next 10, 20 years, the institution is going to be worth so much. Not just in terms of money, but also in terms of ideas. Because when you, for instance, if you go to a museum and you have different variations of different works, like the exhibitions that we do, constantly, there are children who are constantly going there, their classrooms, they are studying, blah, blah, blah. Over time, it changes the perception of their parents and themselves. For me, I don't tend to be so interested in the parents. I'm more interested in the children, because it changes their thinking in a way that when they are older, the way they will relate to their children will be different. So for me, when I'm interested in the change, I'm not interested in immediate change. I'm interested in change that takes time, that is permanent. Because sometimes people will say, oh, I changed this thing in the matter of 1 year or 2 years or 3 years. It's not possible. You don't change. The human being is a difficult and a very complex machine. You can't change the human being's perception in a year or 4 years. No. It takes time, gradually. You need to code the human, like it needs to believe in that reality. And it's not like an imaginary thing. You don't need to, that's the thing that people always say, oh, I want people to imagine. But the reality, the existing condition itself has to change. So you have to invest first and foremost into it to change the structural condition. If the structural condition doesn't change, believe me, the world is not going to change. If you say that, oh, we just want to create things, like some people say, oh, let's do this workshop. No. And we end up spending so much money, and it will not lead anywhere. But imagine that if we had the physical infrastructures and we were using these things and it became part of the reality. That is what leads to the change within the society that we want to. So it's slow.
It's slow but very sure.
Yes.
Interesting. So it's all I've been into northern Ghana. I think at this point, like I said, I'm going to give you the chance so you can ask some questions. Yeah, I think I'll take my first question if anyone is ready. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Mahama? So much was said. Okay.
Oh, you made mention of like the institutions you've gone to and then what you've studied there. And last 2 months, I had the opportunity to send some of my school students to come here, and you were explaining a lot of things to them, including the differences between a helicopter and an aeroplane. So I was actually thinking like you had an engineering minor or even an engineering degree. So I just want to know how you managed to know like all those aspects of engineering and then coupling it with the creative art industry.
Art, that's why I said in the beginning, art, the foundation of art is freedom. There is nothing that states that an artist has to paint or draw. The artist might paint or draw, or that might be the foundation, but it doesn't mean that that's where art begins and ends at. So sometimes there are artists in the world who have, some of the most interesting artists in the 20th century, they didn't come from the background of art. They were either philosophers or engineers or medical doctors. Recently when I was in Italy, like during the coronavirus, there was this artist where he was taking me around some places. And he was an aesthetic surgeon. So he does breast enhancement and blah, blah, but he's an artist. Yeah, so the thinking that he brings into art is very different from someone who has studied art purely. Because when you go to art school to study art, you've learned that, oh, if you don't do this and that, you've not done art. But for him, he's come with a fresh mindset that he wants to be able to bring that thing into art so that it will change the perception of art forever. So for instance, when I was in art school, that was the idea, the foundation, that art has no limitations. So I'm going to the railways, I'm looking at trains, I'm collecting materials, I'm using it to produce work, I'm collecting archives, I see airplanes. I'm like, why not? If I can collect parts of trains and even parts of cars to produce work, why not an airplane? So I think at some point it's the confidence, your sense of confidence and conviction that will either allow you to pursue something. Because there are a lot of people who have ideas, but they are afraid. Because it's such a monument, if you do it and you don't do it well, it's such a monumental failure. You know, like if you invest something, because the airplanes, buying them, transporting them here, reassembling them, working with the engineers in Accra, and I had to study so much about airplanes in order to understand and to do this. And it cost me almost $250,000 to do that, to bring these airplanes here. But someone might say, that's very stupid. Like, that money is more than enough to buy like a house in Trasaco, you can buy a car, things like that. But that's the monumental failure I'm talking about. That monumental failure, if it works, if at the end of the day, if it works, the transformation that it will lead to, it won't be the same thing that maybe if you were just to imagine and then maybe you are just here using a screen and showing the kids, oh, if you go to like airplane, oh, you can do this, blah, blah, blah. Like we go to the schools and we show the kids the drone things, but we also bring them here. So suddenly when they come here, the reality of the screen and the reality here and the proximity, me being a child from a village, let's say in Janachang or Manguli, and suddenly there's an airplane, I can play around it. My father has a farm around it. The reality is not the same as if you were seeing it just on a screen. The screen has a way of removing the human being away from the conditions of the world. But when the physical condition itself, which entraps you, you know that, oh, you are here. There's no way, I'm not going anywhere. But as part of my reality, I know that the image I'm seeing from NASA on Mars, blah, 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 is not so far away from me. It means that it's also possible that I can go even a step further away. And that's when that thing comes. So the artist first and foremost has to insert himself within that space of like there is an infinite possibility. And if you have to use engineering or medicine or whatever way in order to make your work and inspire people, then you go in that direction. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think Daddy wants to ask a question.
I am Mr. Babame, a lecturer from Family Technical University. I'm also an artist. I'm really impressed, highly elated from this project. Very, very impressed. I have practiced art several years. I worked also as a cultural officer. And I knew so much about our culture, about settings and everything. I'm highly impressed. Like he said, art is about life. It's a vision. When it enters you as an artist, it never dies. Even on your deathbed, you see the art working within you. This is a colleague, Fatao, before he came to do National Studies with art. He's an artist, a metal artist. 15 years ago, when I went to Tamale Technical University, we had a vision. Why do we have graduates unemployed? For several years, governments have not been able to solve it. We conducted research, attended conferences just to find a solution to this, only to realize that it's not possible. It takes time, like Honorable had just mentioned. It is difficult to change a human mind once it is set. It should take a gradual process. I realized that the community has a problem. Children going wayward is not because they are not giving, because their parents are poor. I wrote a proposal to create job creation opportunity for deprived women in the society. And just 2 weeks ago, we had a group of women who have come out to try training their colleagues on liquid soap making, fine yogurt, hair shampoo, and so on and so forth. And with this vision, it looks like this, just crossing my vision. And I'll be glad to be part of this honorable this mission. And I'll be very glad to be with you. Thank you very
much. Interesting. Thank you very much, Daddy. I think this was not a question, but it was an addition. Thank you very much. I think somebody's asking a question.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a hand.
Yeah.
Okay. Actually, I have a question.
Okay. I think I have about 3 or 4 questions to Mr. Mahama. And as Daddy have said, I'm highly impressed coming to see this. In fact, I couldn't have missed this today. And the question I want to ask is that, first question is that, were there times in your life that you felt like giving up, because in doing this, if one is not passion driven, at some point in time you give up, because it takes a lot of time, a lot of money and all that. And then also the second question is there a space created for women, young women in northern region, to empower them through this act? And then the third question is, at what point in time in your life did you realize that this was what you wanted to do? Even though initially you made mention of that, you spoke about that. But is that something that actually, aside how Daddy was pushing you to go into it and all that, when he realized you actually had potentials for that, was there times that you yourself really felt like, okay, this is what I actually wanted to do? Because people need to understand why before they can adopt or even accept. As you said, changing the mindset of the young ones helps much better than trying to change the adults, because for them, their minds are already made up. So there is no way you can just use a short period of time to change them. But when you take the little ones, as they grow, they are able to adopt. And that is a generational transition, because it moves from them to their children, to their children's children, and it continues. So probably if you could tell us something more about that. And also, I'm so much interested in women, whether if there is a space here for women, young women within northern region, to empower them to be able to also get something like that. Because it's hard to see women engaged in stuff like this. You only see those things on TV and on social media and all that. So do you have space for young women in northern region to train them?
Yeah, there are all ideas that we actually have. So that's why I was talking about the idea of the art school actually going forward. Because as I said before, in the beginning when I started, it was just a studio. But eventually I decided, why not expand it so that it becomes a full institution, like a school, blah, blah, blah. There are a few organizations in town that we are currently in conversation with. Like there's this aviation school in town. But when we started the drone workshops here, the students that we had, a majority of them were young women actually from the community. It's just that the problem here in the north is that there is so much damage that has been done. One, the level of poverty, and also like the state hasn't invested a lot into here. So even after all the work that we've done with some of the girls, their family at the end of the day, they are maybe JSS. One of them recently, I asked and they said that, her family has sent her to Accra to go and do Kai. Yeah. So the problems that we are dealing with, they are very, very serious problems. No matter what you do, sometimes it slips back into the older image. So for me, I'm trying to see how best we can work so that in the future, when it's much more of a strong institution, which the students, because for now they come, and then you work with them, and then they go home. So the influences are double. When they go home, sometimes all that you've done, their family will undo everything. But if it was a place where the students are just like they are with you, there are people who are with you for like a very extended period, and you are with them and constantly you are traveling, like, because there are programs which I'm working on with some institutions around the world, and there's a possibility like some of the people we're working with, the young people, as I travel around the world, they go to different institutions, study, look at things here and there, but it's all time. But I'm very sensitive to this issue of the women's condition here. My work in the beginning was actually the situation with the Kayais in Accra. That was what even allowed me, that was one of the things that prompted me to come back here. Because in Accra, I remember during one of the last elections, one of the political parties was saying that, when they come to power, they will build hostels for the Kayais. And I thought that was very stupid. Like, you don't build hostels for anyone. You have to make sure you create an infrastructure that prevents that from happening in the future. I don't want my children to be born and the word Kayai to exist. It's created a divide, an ideological divide and a physical divide between the north and the south, you see. So for me, the condition of the Kayai was what I even used, like idea-wise and also material-wise, because I work with a lot of them. So the smoke thing that I was even thinking about, that was one of the ideas that I had in the beginning. I said, but if Kwame Nkrumah's programs of the silos had existed, Kayais would not exist, because the Nkrumah Voli was actually meant to store share nuts. And it would have stored enough share nuts, and that Voli, the share nuts it would have stored would have been more than enough to fund multiple programs in the north across entire different timelines. So I was thinking, is it possible that through the work, we can create, let's say, institutions here that can reverse these conditions? So I started talking to some of the KIAs about, for instance, creating farms, the shea nuts, processing of certain types of shea nuts products, the smoke industry, making cotton. Is it possible that they will want to come back to the north so that we work on these things? For me, I'm not doing it from a profit point of view, but it's also part of the artistic thing, that through art, it allows for the condition to change. So as for that aspect, it's something that I'm really sensitive towards, that we are working on gradually. And to the last question, yes, like when I was in secondary school, when I started studying art, at some point I realized that it was something I really wanted to do, because I had never felt that amount of freedom in my life, and I'd never felt as happy as I was when I started studying art. As I said, when I was younger in boarding school, I was always crying. But when I went to secondary school and I started making art, suddenly it was almost as if a certain void inside me had been filled up. And nothing really mattered again in the world. I felt so happy, like everything was good. So I always say that I never really had the teenage years where teenagers are like puberty years, they're throwing tantrums, they don't know what to find. But at the age of 14, suddenly I knew what I wanted to do. Even at the age of 15, I bought shares from the cocoa processing company, CPC, which actually owned the Nkrumah Voli, which I bought. So if you look at my interest even in this thing, of course, at the time, I didn't know one day I'll grow up to make work that would come back to looking at these state institutions. But by the age of 15, I already had a clear idea of what I wanted, the direction I wanted my life to go in. So I guess there were multiple things that contributed to it. But for me, I guess that I only feel grateful, because I feel like if you also find yourself in a society, like a family that supports, that understands. The problem with most families is that they don't understand, they don't know, and they also don't want to leave room for understanding. But if your children or wards or friends want to do something, just allow them and watch. Yeah, allow them. After all, it's their life. Yeah, but people say, oh, but he become a burden upon us. That's not your problem. You can either decide to help them or not, but let them do the monumental failure again. Let them continue going. If it works out in the end, at least it will be for the benefit of society. But if they fail, they will learn something from it, and then other things will be produced out of that set of failure. Yeah.
Interesting. There's a question, but before that, I just want to come to this. You said there was a point you realized that was what you wanted to do. I want to know that feeling. I mean, how did things turn for you after you were able to know within yourself that I wanted to pursue this? I mean, how was the journey at that point?
I can't describe it. There's a certain sense of excitement.
Okay.
You know, it's like, till now, I always feel like I'm a child, actually, the way I look at the world. Yeah, I have so much excitement when I'm in town. When I talk to people, sometimes I feel like I'm too excited about the thing. I don't know, there's a certain sense of happiness or joy or fulfillment within you that's when you know that... I think
that would be the best time in everyone's life, right? Yeah. To know that this is the path you want.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, young people are watching, young people are listening. What advice do you have in relation to, identifying that one thing that you really want to do? Because I know it's a really difficult thing for people to identify. We had people who grow working and they still don't know. That one thing they're made for, one thing that they really want to do. What advice do you have in relation to experience to help young people be able to discover this early so that they can be able to, work in that line and be able to succeed through that? What advice? Because young people are listening.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess they should be patient. One, patience is a virtue. And secondly also, yeah, I guess a lot of people always want to succeed from the beginning. I think it's a disaster if you start that way, from wanting to succeed. Failure is very important. Yeah, like sometimes before we even start the thing, we already want the thing to succeed. But sometimes you have to imagine that the thing is going to fail before you start. So failure has to guide you in the beginning. You have to imagine that the thing that you're going to do, it might not work. You know, SpaceX has changed space travel quite a lot. and the founder of the company, Elon Musk, a lot of the experiments that they did actually to get the company where it wasn't actually based on just doing something to let it work the first time. The Starship, for instance, which they've been working on, they've tried flying it more than 5 times and it always explodes. But because they programmed that into the building of it, you know you want to do something, but you know that this thing that I want to do is going to change the world. But because it's going to change the world, it's going to be difficult. And it's not going to be smooth. It's going to fail, there's going to be stumbling blocks, blah, blah, blah. So that's when you actually know that something, if you start producing something, and immediately everyone is saying that, oh, it's very good, everyone is giving you a thumbs up, you have to really stop and then really ask yourself a question. Yeah. But if you start something and everyone's like, oh, this thing, oh, we've seen it before, it will not work, oh, of course, there are some of them that, honestly, it will not work. But there are a lot of them too that mostly people just don't have the patience. So they need to be patient. And secondly, also, they need to believe in whatever they are doing. And thirdly, also, they need to allow room for failure. Yeah. If you don't allow room for failure in your thinking, your life will be a disaster. If you allow room for failure, nothing will surprise you. Yeah. If the thing doesn't work out, you're like, after all. But a lot of people, when they are doing something, they put themselves so much. They want to get it at all costs.
Yeah, they want to be perfect.
Yeah. So if it doesn't happen, it becomes a disappointment. And then it can shatter your dreams and everything. People get frustrated and all that. But if you realize that the world is actually a disaster to begin with, nothing will actually, like in building or doing all of this, sometimes you come across things, like one of your questions, you come across like moments when, I always tell people that Ghana, for instance, if you don't have love in your heart, you can't live in this country, particularly when you have the opportunity to live or be elsewhere. But when you know what the system is and you understand it for what it is and you buy into it, you're like, oh, this is what it is. Of course, I don't want it to remain this way. I want to evolve or change it. And you're working. And those things come along your way. Like, oh, like you find your way around them, you work around them, and then, of course, some of them are so frustrating that you have to abandon them and then move elsewhere. But generally, you have to come to terms with the place that you are, the failures and conditions that it comes with, and allow that to guide you in your thinking.
Interesting. I think that's, nailed it, because a lot of people fear, very afraid of what will happen.
Yes.
You don't want to start and fail. So because of that, you just decide to not start at all.
Yeah.
So today we have learned from Mr. Mahama that you should be aware that failures may come. So you should be aware of them whilst you do whatever you do. You shouldn't stay back because you think you may fail. You just need to go on. So I'm going to come back for questions. I think you had a question.
My name is Smile. I think I would say this is the best time to be here at this moment. I came not long ago and I've heard something. And the part I heard and I want to make a comment is the part is that young people, some of them wait till they become old before they think of starting something. I want to know, is it all about starting, or how should you nurture or examine your ideas before you start?
Yeah, I guess when I say start something, I don't necessarily mean build something. Not everyone has to be able to build institutions like this, but I'm talking about the way you think. Is the thinking. I think the greatest problem of the human being, particularly in this century, is the thinking. Yeah, there are so many ideological conflicts. A lot of people think that, there are different types of people in this world. There are some people who think that they are born to fit in society, so they conform with everything that happens. But there are other people who also are born and they think that, maybe by my lifestyle or what I do, it's possible that it can influence the society that I'm in to think differently about how they do things or how they operate. So at any point in time in your lifetime, whether you're like 14, 15, 18, you have to start to believe that whatever your life is, there's a much greater purpose to it, that it can actually influence other people in a much more positive way. So if you're thinking, whatever you do, the actions that you do, you have to allow your thinking or whatever personality that you create to guide those things. Yeah, a lot of young, like, because mostly you meet a lot of young people, like their demeanor, the way they speak, the way they relate to the people around them. Yeah, there are a lot of questions around that, you know. It's important that at least when you're growing up, you realize that you are part of, yeah, you can influence time. You are not just passing through time, you know. A lot of people think that when the world is already set, so whether I do good or bad, the world is going in a certain direction. But no, you always have to think of yourself as some kind of an anomaly. That you can effect change in the timeline, that the timeline will change because of one person. Look at Kwame Nkrumah. Because of Kwame Nkrumah, Ghana's timeline is not what it is today. If we didn't have a president like Kwame Nkrumah, Ghana would have even been worse off than the country it is today. But 50-something years after he was overthrown, we are still enjoying the legacies of Kwame Nkrumah's work. Yes, so it doesn't really matter whatever you do, whether it fully works within a time or not. Sometimes it will die off, but after a certain point, it will come up again, and then it will do something, then it will go down, then it will come down again. So I'll use the music. Let me just throw a jab at the musicians, because a lot of them always want to stay relevant. They always want to be in the limelight. It doesn't work that way. You don't always have to be there. Sometimes you create something, and that thing lives beyond you, and it creates other things. So the idea of you always being present, and no, it doesn't work. You're not going to change society anyway. If you don't believe that it's possible for you to, through the work or your lifestyle, to create something that can influence society, that if you subtract yourself from the equation, it can still operate, then it's a total disaster. You don't have to be there all the time. You have to create a condition that can change the timeline beyond yourself. Does it make sense? Yeah. You have to create a condition that will change your timeline. Like even in politics, let's say we don't expect that one political party will rule the country for, let's say, a long time. You should be able to create something that beyond you, even if someone else comes. That's why in Africa we have politicians who don't want to leave power. Sometimes it's possible that even just 4 years of you being in power, you can change so much that in the next 100 years, you don't need to be there. There are other people. You would have changed the system and the people within it. So those people can inherit the system and push it in those directions. Yeah, it's a total disaster if you think that, oh, even if you do it by yourself and yeah, you always have to be there. No, it's the systematic change that I'm talking about. And you can influence that in your own little way.
I think people have the feeling that they always have to nurture their ideas to some extent.
No, you don't have to. You have to start. If I was waiting to nurture my ideas to this point, I wouldn't have built this institution. Because when I had the first idea from this, I was in uni, final year, in 2010. I didn't have money to start this until 2014. And even that, I built it gradually. That's why I was showing the pictures of the space, the way it's changed over the time. When we started building this space, a bag of cement was 15 cedis in 2014. Today, it's almost 60 cedis. So if you are going to wait, the world is not waiting for you to nurture your ideas. Whatever ideas you have there, you put it in the world, and then it will bounce back to you. Then you put it, then it evolves. Then you're going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. You never have all the ideas in your head. You never have all the ideas, I'm telling you. Never, not in any timeline. Because you are a human being, and part of your thing, your brain is that it processes ideas and it grows. Even algorithms change and they process and they grow. So how much more you, a human being? The brain has so much capacity. So when you start something, there is a shelf here. Later on, when we are walking around, I'll show you my notebooks. You see the ideas in the beginning. So you do one thing, and then you write on it, you stumble, you talk to people, we have conversations like this. Trust me, after having this conversation and the questions, I'm not the same person as I was before. Someone might ask me a question, and then it might bring a certain eureka moment. I'm like, I never thought about this thing. That's the capacity of the human being, because you don't know everything, but then you still want to be able to influence a change, so you will do it regardless, whether it works or not. And it also brings us back to the idea of the failure, that if you want to have all the ideas in your head, then it means that you want to create a perfect or utopian society, but you can't create that. So start with what you have, and then through that you can learn, oh, this will work, this will not work, let's change this, let's add this, and then as you go along,
Interesting. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Good amount of metal art integrations. My question is, I have two questions. The first one is, how do you finance your exhibitions, installations, transportation, because you transport from different countries to different countries? And the second question is, what are your plans for local artisans like us who are into the business for profit? Unlike you are not in for profit. We are in for profit. What are your plans for us who are in for profit?
Okay, I'll answer your first question. Mostly the second question I like to dodge it, but I'll answer it. I'll try to answer it. Yeah. My work, I finance it myself. So whatever money I make from selling my work internationally or teaching or whatever, that's what I put into it. There is no funding agency, there's no donor or whatever. So everything you see, SEC, Red Clay, Nkrumah, Voli-ni, I actually work, I teach abroad, I do exhibitions, and then whatever money I'm paid, that's what I use in building the institution. And also the reason why I did that was because, it's not because I never had access to funding. I could have, but I didn't want to start that way. If you can, it's also the legacy I was talking about. You want to inspire a generation to think differently. Because people always, like, for instance, when people come here, a lot of people have always been saying, oh, we are sure someone is giving him money somewhere. But it's not no one. Yeah, if someone was giving me money, we will not be having this conversation. Or we will not, all the programs we are doing with the kids, me going around rural communities teaching children. Because who has that time? Like, there's so much I could be doing in my life. Why should I be spending my time dealing with kids? Yeah, what would they bring you? That's the question that you ask yourself. It's because you are doing it on your own accord and there is something you're doing. That's why you can explore that in that direction. But once someone is giving you money, you have to make profits, or you have to, there has to be a certain gain. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that the artisan aspect is also very important to me. It's something, for me, I think that I'm trying to really understand where my work or practice lies, because I work with artisans to make work. Of course, when I was in uni, Smiles did the same course as I did. Painting and sculpture. Third year, you do industrial attachments, and you can go anywhere. I came to Tamale to do it at the Center for National Culture. So I used to sit with the craftsmen and local artisans and all that. And of course, we want to be able to change that. That's why I'm saying that we have to evolve the craftsmanship itself. We have to, sometimes we have to almost industrialize it, because a lot of the things that we produce here, even when I go to where they make the leather work and all that, you realize that maybe the quality and there are a lot of things, innovations that need to be done. But as I said initially, infrastructure. If we don't invest into the infrastructure, into the institution, spaces that can help this thing to evolve, you always stay around the same thing. The end game is that you want to be able to make products that actually go all around the world, right? Yeah. The art center, sometimes when I go there, excuse me to say, it feels a bit pathetic around the country, because we only keep it for tourists to come. Oh, tourists will come, let me buy one basket from you. Let me buy this. But no, it's not right. Even the government hasn't put enough measures in place to actually allow these businesses to actually strive. So if you actually institutionalize it, where you are supporting these people, you are allowing them to improve upon the products that they are creating. Because at the end of the day, the point is to be able to sell and make money out of it. So why can't we do it to a point that it becomes a global phenomenon? So that's the point. And to become a global phenomenon, we need to build institutions like this and let it grow in multiple directions. That's the thing. It's not about I'm not interested. I don't do well with petty talks or petty things. I like something that you invest into it and allow it to grow, allow it to reach its maximum capacity. And at that point, it can go anywhere. Like, my works are shown everywhere in all the museums around the world. And it's not because I didn't start by thinking that, oh, if I do it, maybe let me do it for my local audience, but because they will understand it because of my, no. It's a global, whatever you're doing here, it affects people in other parts of the world. Like Vlisco, the cloth she's wearing, it wasn't produced in Ghana. It was produced in Indonesia originally, the batik. The Dutch took it under the Industrial Revolution and then made it. And then Europe, they wouldn't buy it because of the patterns. They brought it to West Africa, and then we added stories, blah, 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 proverbs and other. And they started making cloth. They created companies here, GTP, blah, blah, blah. So sometimes you think all these companies are competing. No, it's the same company. So the idea, they produce and then you consume. So every Friday, people will say that, oh, let's wear Friday wear. But it's not Ghanaian. This thing wasn't invented in Ghana. And the companies that even produce it, we don't own them. So what tells you that this thing is Ghanaian? So the thinking, that's why I came back to the thing. It's a thinking. Our thinking is so limited. So it doesn't allow us to push the thing so much further. So at the end of the day, if I'm going to, let's say, invest in artisanship, I want to be able to do it in such a way that the products I will create, someone will be in China and then they'll be ordering for it. Someone will be in Japan and they'll be talking about it. Someone will be in, what's the name, Chicago. They'll be like, oh, have you seen this thing from Ghana? But the artisanship here is quite limited. And I think that it's something that we have to penetrate also. And it will require work and investment. And it's not, I wouldn't say it's not my job. As an artist in building all of this, I also have that at heart. But the government, the ministry has to invest into it. And to do that, excuse me to say, we need the right people and the right leadership. If not, all these years, nothing will ever get done. Because you think that, oh, we are doing the guys a favor. After all, they are selling the thing, they are surviving. Oh, they make 100 cedis a month. But it's not good enough. You want it to become a global phenomenon. You're a young man. If you make, let's say, 50,000 Ghana cedis a month, it's not bad. Wouldn't you want that? From selling your, or doing whatever. Yeah, so why not? Yeah, yeah, so why not? Yeah, but in order for that to happen, we physically have to intervene within the system and change it so that the market that is created for what you are doing will get to a point where you are sitting and producing in your studio, that before you finish producing the thing, there's already a market for it around the world, and there is a way you have to do it. There's a system that we have to create that and actually foster into that. Yeah, if not, we won't, yeah, we will just be making petty things.
My name is Okasha. I'm a graphic artist. Okay. I'm a graphic artist. I was also having similar questions in mind. Artist. So I also want to know the plans you have for the graphic art. I don't know whether you have plans for it, because I can see you are very much interested in collecting old materials and history. and also, I'm someone who is also trying to create change in this part of the country. Because when I was also trying to do visual arts in the senior high school, my whole family and my whole friends were all against it, except only one of my senior brothers, who helped me to go through, and I was able to proceed to the university and did graphic design. So now I'm also trying to create change in the society. So by doing so, I tried organizing free classes. I'm even organizing free graphic design classes for all people in Tamale. But for now, I don't have a place to host it.
Yeah, so that's why we have to collaborate on things like that. That's why I was talking about collaboration. Because I spoke about the aviation school. There are medical practitioners people I've been talking with. And some of the workshops, they actually will come here and then do some of these workshops. So for me, that's why I was talking about the infrastructure. That if we're able to have spaces like this, it will allow for us to come together collectively to do things. So if you want to do, let's say, a workshop around graphic design or whatever, you just come here. The institution is non-profit. It's free. You can use the facility whichever way you want to, as far as you don't take money from people. So, but at the same time, if, like for instance, there are a lot of, we work with graphic designers in the city to actually design our exhibition posters, print things, so why not? For me, I'm just a single person who is meeting people trying to do things. But if you come to me and then you show me your work and say, oh, this is what I do, is there a possibility of this and that and that? Why not? We would work together and get things done. So I think that we should find ways of connecting and doing things. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Ade, keep smiling. Do you have questions for us?
She asked us one question, not 4 questions this time.
Okay, let me ask my last question. How are you able to move an airplane from Accra to Tamale?
Oh, let me play a video for you. It's a short video. That way, I will not talk plenty because they say a picture is a picture. It's 1,000 words. Huh? It's worth 1,000 words. Okay. So some of these old airplanes, Starbow and others, they were Master Coma. You want them to swallow you. So this is the old Russian airplane, a Polish airplane. So it belonged to a Swiss white guy who had brought it here to fly it as a hobby, but the civil aviation wouldn't give him a permit. So it was parked at the airport for many years. So when I spoke to him, he actually sold it to me. And he bought it, the original receipt, he bought it in the US for like 160,000 USD. But when I asked him for it, he gave it to me for 15,000 USD. So it was almost like a gift, actually. And we worked with truck drivers. This guy at the top, he's not an engineer, he's just some truck mate. He's so enthusiastic about a thing. So some of those guys helped us to dismantle together with the engineers. So we put them on trucks. Some of the trucks that when Ibrahim Mahama was building the Circle Dubai, they used it in transporting the beams. So longer, because the fuselage is long. So we needed trucks that could extend. So I also got a drone and I filmed it from Accra all the way to Tamale, because I wanted to see how the thing was changing within the landscape. So I ran about in Kumasi, and we worked with the police. I had to pay the police almost 60,000 cedis for escort. Yeah, so if I tell you the cost involved, sometimes it's so stupid and ridiculous. But when the children are studying inside and they're excited and it's giving them ideas, all of this doesn't matter anymore. Now the reality has changed. We are trying to create a new event horizon, and that event horizon is not based on money. Because if you're going to think about the money, you'll be like, why should I put this amount of money? But it's not about the money per se. It's about the phenomenon. This is at Swami, near the School of Education thereabouts. So this at Bupe. And interestingly enough, in 2013, I went to Bupe to actually film the under of the bridge, because I was thinking about structural, how it works, how it could inform my work and all that. And then several years later, we were thinking whether it's possible to carry these heavy things across this, because there's a next image that you'll see. You see the police escorts in front. Yeah. So there's an image that will come next. This image. And you'll never see this image in your life. You know? It's like, it's possible that this image might never repeat itself ever again. It's never happened before, that you see airplane which is in the sky, and then on Bupe, on the river, on the same, like, those two things, they don't cross. They don't cross. And it was very, very important to get this. And in order to get this, when we're driving with the truck drivers, because we took almost 24 hours to get to Tamale, and I was with them. So we went ahead after a certain place, and then we came to park at Bupe. There's a total filling station there. I charged my batteries, and then I went there, and I did test flights. I was trying to look at the angles, blah, 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 blah. So by the time they got there, I told the policemen, let the moment trucks in and parking, like they should all just stop. So that, like, I caught, like, you have to, it's almost as if you're also like a film director or something. You are filming, directing, you're like, wait, do this, da, 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 da. And that's how I got all these images. Because I wanted, later on, when someone sees it this way, like, you know, if I were to describe it to you, it will be so abstract. But when you see it this way, in relation to the landscape and everything, suddenly it demystifies that object. It's like, this thing that I was seeing so far away, I didn't know that it could also perform the same function as a Abuboyaka or Dalori or something like that. They're all on the same space. This was the one from the Tamale airport. Yeah. So you see, suddenly, let's pause here. You see the relationship between this and then the truck carrying the cement. The truck versus the airplane versus the bus. These are things that are never in the same image. the airplane versus the bent landscape. The people who are catching the Sabah or whatever. This at Kamina Junction. But that day they insulted us. But because we had to put up the lights from the whole of Tamale in order to carry on this thing. Because they are electric wires. And each time the plane goes underneath it, it sparks. So we told the VRA people to put up the lights so that we embark on this. And they said they won't do it. And then we took the airplane out of the place anyway. So as soon as they realized that we're on the road, they now sent personnel to come and help us to actually transport it to this place. And the airport also, we had to remove the airport gate in order for it. So we had to remove the gate completely in order for this to happen. So there are a lot of decisions. But at the end of the day, the conviction, like at some point, and you also need people who believe in what you are doing. You don't need people who are negative. Like I have an uncle I work with, Uncle Isa. He is like when I have an idea and I'm like, oh uncle, I want to do this. Can you help me to do it? He's like, okay, let's see how we can start. And then along the way, I'm like, hey Charlie, this thing here is not possible. The way I was imagining it. But my uncle's like, oh, don't worry, it will happen. Yeah, so this, like there were many moments when I said that, no, this thing, it will not, like, I'm going to stop. Then my uncle's like, oh no, it will happen. Let's continue. So the transportation of the airplanes and every other thing, there is a video, let me see, there's a video here which he is in. So,
can we watch some of these videos after the discussion?
Yes. Yeah, so
there are a lot more videos.
Yeah, so this is, let's say this is from the Nkrumah Voli. So my same uncle, he's the same one, maybe supervising the excavation of the site, blah, blah, blah. If you don't, so imagine all of this was in the building. Like after going to school and doing a PhD, this is not the work that you are going to do. Like some people are thinking about wearing tie and going to sit in an office. But the world is a dirty place, so you have to do the dirty work. And these guys, they normally sit around the place and they smoke. And suddenly, they've realized that, oh, there's opportunity. Oh, maybe when the space transforms, they'll get work, blah, blah, blah. They are more interested in the bats and all that. So sometimes they're like, oh, how can I organize this and that? But there are people around you who actually will believe you. So that's also the other thing that we didn't talk about. That you have to find people who actually believe in you and the thing that you are doing. We surround ourselves with too many people who are negative. So fire service. So we brought them there to spray the whole place, to remove the dirt. So you have to, the state institutions which they will not even use, you have to find a way of bringing them actually to save things. I'm sure Friday when Nkrumah Voli opens and you come, you'll be surprised that this is the same space. So imagine this. You think that they are doing galamsey. Yeah, 3 months of doing this. 3 months every day of removing, because people have been shitting in it, people have been, like this, imagine all of this was down there.
I can see we are all excited about this video. I think there'll be much time to watch this after the interview. So let's just end up, if you have, so I take like 3 more questions, but if you have some questions here, somebody asked if they can install, they can bring their staffs here to keep.
Like what kind of things?
Like you have some, like you have archives here.
Yes,
like
yes.
They have the person that actually specified, I think.
So like antiques, old shop bottles, old archive TV.
Yeah, we actually need those things. The idea is to expand the archive going forward. So we'll create even more archives going forward.
So you're ready to receive?
Yeah, there is this old, you know the Russian bungalows? They have this old cemetery there which they are trying to acquire, actually, to create an archive there. So maybe we'll take some of the archives will exist in that space. Yeah. And I'm the person is saying that no, my thing is not going to the cemetery.
So any more so that we can end and then have the walk around?
So you see this? These are the inside of the other silos around the country. So the Nkrumah Voli, if it had been completed, this is how the inside would have looked like. Yeah. No, it's done actually.
My name is Hussein. The question I wanted to ask, what
category that we can categorize your collection.
What?
Your collections.
Collection.
Yeah. Okay. I wanted to align it with if probably we should hope or pray that maybe you will start to take cultural or historic cultural pieces. I don't know, like we have in Menchia Palace, and then Typical Castle. So that although I can see that your collection directs to contemporary or futuristic viewpoint, but we are in a generation that we don't know where we came from historically and where we are going to. So probably, should we hope that in the future you create a museum that are full of collection of historic or traditional from our ancestors, so that we can actually also know probably a little bit of our ancestors or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, no, certainly. They are all part of those ideas. I was talking about the Coma regions in the beginning. And if you know the history of the Coma regions, they are some of the early settlers here in the north. Yeah, so as far back as the 5th century, yeah, long before the Dagombes came here, long before Ashantis or Akans or anything. Yeah, so you have a lot of these artifacts which have been excavated, and they've been kept in they're mostly in Dagon and other archaeological institutions. So the Nkrumah Voli, the reason why I was so interested in the excavation process was because I almost imagined that we were excavating those things, traditional histories and things like that. Yeah, so when we have the exhibition that we're opening on Friday, we'll actually have some of these historical figures in them. But I've also been talking to people in Yendi and other places about collecting historical material, because there's an older man in Tamale, his name is Ben Saibu. He used to be a lawyer. He was an MP in the West Mampusi district during Rawlins' time. And he's dedicated a lot of his time and his life actually to preserving archaeological and historical materials. So I had a conversation with him and the community in that region about the possibility of creating a museum that could allow us to be able to look at these things. And they said, yes, why not? If we are able to build an institution like that, maybe we can gift all these collections to it, so blah, blah, blah. So it's something that we're also working on. When this institution grows to a point, let's say in the next 4 or 5 years, when there are a lot more multiple spaces, because the land I bought here is a lot. It's more than 200 acres of land. So if we have different institutions, we have a museum dedicated to traditional history. We have a museum dedicated to, let's say, contemporary modern art. We have a museum dedicated to, but for me, I'm not interested in the segregation of things. I'm interested in bringing them together. So if you have a museum, it should be one museum, even if they have different names, they should be able to perform similar things. So I don't see why you should have a, let's say, the smoke of, let's say, the first Yana, and be, next to it, you don't have, let's say, a contemporary painting, or let's say, a metallic work that, let's say, a contemporary artist has produced. That is very important. Yeah, it allows us to be able to travel between time. For me, the time travel is very important. If not, you will end up still building a generation which is stuck in a certain moment in time. Older people will say that, oh, these younger people, we don't understand them. In our time, we didn't do things that way. But there is never such thing as a time. Maybe it's possible that back in the days, when Kwame Nkrumah was building some of these things, he was not even thinking about his time or his generation. He was thinking about other timelines which were yet to come. So there are two ways of looking at things. And there are also other ways that can also feature within it. So we hope that we can build or expand institutions. There's a young architect that I met not long ago, I've forgotten his name. He designed this Bewa Palace, this new Bewa Palace. My father was showing me a video of it recently even. So I think there are a lot of younger people now who are becoming more aware and more conscious about these things, and they actually want to do. So I'm hoping that not just us, but there'll be multiple people. Even your own house can be a space like that. So it doesn't have to be places like this alone.
I think Daddy has a question.
No, I just want to contribute to this. I'm an art educator. I've been teaching art for the past several years. And I worked at the Lower Powers for 8 years as a district culture officer with the art council. Yes. You know, every exhibition has a philosophy. It is the philosophy that dictates what kind of material that you use for that particular exhibition. I handle an exhibition too. So the philosophy I have realized for this particular institution is passion to help humanity. And in the attempt to gather these relics or materials to convert into educational materials to change human mind and so on and so forth, it is very difficult for you to restrict yourself to only one aspect of it. So, like he asked, what kind of materials? No, this is a general arts collection with a philosophy. Now, for example, the Bewa Palace, like he said, we used to conduct research on history of the Dagombas. If you go to Art Council, there are a lot of research we have done that is stuck there. Like we always said, we make researches at universities, they remain on the shelves, they are not even implemented. So, like he said, when this is well established, I think all these areas will then be identified and people can come for research. Just last week, somebody was writing a research on the PhD and wanted to know the dresses of the Gombas before the new way of dressing. The only advice I gave was that Nazegina historically was the first person to accept Islam on behalf of the Gombas. So he started the mode of dressing for that. So anybody who wants a history about the Gomba dressing before, it should be before Nazegina. So this is the information I want to have in that.
Thank you very much. I think this is going to be our last question. This is the last question I'm going to take from us. We've been here for like 1.5 hours. And I think we need to end so that we can have much time to walk around and explore other aspects of the whole place, Red Clay Studios. There are lots more outside that we need to explore. So, like I said, this is going to be the last question I'm going to take from you. But I have a very last question for you before we end. I think everyone here will be able to see that, and I think this is generally what everyone says. You're very humble. Aside the fact that you have a global acclaim you have, you're very, very humble. I want to know whether it is the secret to your success and what advice, what word of wisdom do you have to share with young people who want to be at where you are, young people who want to go far beyond that. What advice do you have in relation to that? You want to know the secret.
Yeah. I don't know. For me, I learned a lot from my father, actually, in terms of humility. And also, I had a professor friend at the university, a mentor, Dr. Karikacha. Yeah, like a man with so much knowledge, but yet, like, he's so humble. Like, he always acts as if he doesn't know, to start with. When he's having a conversation with you, he doesn't impose himself upon you. There are a lot of people who know, and then before they start talking to other people, they're like, oh, you people, you don't know anything. But he knows so much. Like, I've never met such a person in my life. But to start with, he wants to know what you know, and he wants to help you to push forward what you know, and not to impose upon you. And also, my father, the way I've known him since I was little, is the same person he is. You know, I live with him, and sometimes you imagine when you are outside and people speak of him, say, like, just Savanna, I'm with him and we're just talking, we're like watching a movie or something, or like you go to his room, bring him make tea for him, and you see the way he's lived his entire life. You ask yourself at the end of the day, and then what? Yeah, a lot of people live their lives without asking that question. And so what? Because a lot of people feel that maybe when they are growing up, like through struggles and other things, when they start making money or whatever, they have to either create a distance between themselves and the society, or they have to elevate themselves to a certain point. But it doesn't change anything, honestly. I think that when you are humble, there is a much more larger possibility that you will connect actually with people and learn a lot more from them, which actually makes you a much better person. Yeah. And also there are a lot of people or things people have met, favors I've gotten in my life, and I don't think I would have been able to get any of that if I didn't really take life easy. Yeah, because it doesn't really, honestly. This life, there isn't so much to it. There's so much, but at the end of the day, there's not so much to it. Yeah, you can be here today and tomorrow you are dead. So, what's it? But people always live as if the world, they control life. But you don't control life. Anything can happen at any point in time. If you have money today, you can lose everything tomorrow. And when you lose it, you actually go back to the people that you are with. You are not an island. So for me, I think that it's important that when you stay that way, it allows you to connect with the people around you. And if you connect better with the people around you, it makes you a much better person. So who doesn't want to be a much better person?
Is this the best way to end our program?
Yes.
Is that the best? I can see everyone. I think this is really, really interesting. Thank you so much, Mr. Mahama. After all, I mean, what's next? I think he just said it. Like, yes, I heard someone say an exhibition. That's not actually what I'm saying. After all, what's next? Like, definitely, life is nothing, like you said. You may be here today, and tomorrow you'll not be there. And like he said also, we all have so much expectations. And there are lots we all want to do. And I don't think anyone wants to do it outside somewhere that people are not there. You want to do it for people. You want to do it with people. And definitely there's so much more you need to learn from the people you want to do it for. So if you don't bring yourself down, get more closer to them, there are lots more you will miss out on. And that could have actually helped in helping you, making whatever you wanted to do much more better for you. So very, very important. Be humble. Humility is very important in the journey. And even though he didn't mention, I think I asked this question, was it part of the things that made it very easy for him to succeed as an artist? I think it answers the question. So if you're also here and you want to go far, either as an artist, a medical doctor, whatever it is, the key thing from Ibrahim Mahama is humility. So you need to stay humble. That's the end of the program. But before we go, like I said, it is northern, even though it's Northern Ghana for an initiative of the Active Youth. I'm going to be doing this. I think this is the first session with Ibrahim Mahama, but we're going to have other sessions with different people who actually will not be from the arts industry, but from different fields that will also be very important to you people as young people. Because I know we have people who are interested in arts, a lot of people who are also interested in other fields. We're not advising young people to go into art, but we believe that it is a field or it's an industry that if a lot of young people go into, it's going to help not only them, but the society at large. So I just want to share some of the things I learned from him. He said a lot of things, but I don't think I'll be able to say everything. Okay, so I just want to touch on some of the things that I took notes of. So one of the things he kept saying is that we need to embrace failure. You have to understand that it's possible that you fail, so you have to know it whilst you go in. Another thing is that it's not all about the money you make. It's not all about, but it's about leaving a legacy. And it's not too late. I mean, it's not too early for you as a young person. You shouldn't think that you need to get to a particular point before you start living your dream. You shouldn't think that you have to get to a particular point before you start bringing your ideas to life. At whatever point you are, with whatever resources you have, with whatever opportunities you have to start living that dream. You have to start bringing it into reality, like you said. You can't remember everything. So when you start, it's like a project. New ideas come. Like you said, Red Clay was just like a studio for himself as an artist to work. But later he realized that it will be much better when I do it this way. And it's very important that you need to be thinking, you have to be a visionary person. I don't think it's only artists who need to be visionary, but everyone, so far as you are someone who don't want to be the same tomorrow, you should be visionary, you should be thinking a lot. So that's one thing we all need to take note of. Yes, I think this is one of the things I took from the whole thing. But generally, I think if you look, you need to also not be so much interested in what you make. As someone say, yeah, in the business aspect of the art, but even as a business person in art, the main priority, I mean, the key thing here should be about impacting into the lives of people, creating the change that will help generations to come, creating the change that will help society. So above all, money, yeah, you make it, but you should be thinking about making the society a better place for everyone. You don't know, it will come back to you in a different way. Yeah, so it is a window in Northern Ghana, into Northern Ghana project, currently with Ibrahim Mahama, first edition. We will be having a lot more editions with different people that will help you learn so much. I'm very happy that you guys learned so much today. I'm actually Beauty Sarah. I'm actually a host for that program. Yeah, just to say, guys, I have not feeling very well today, so I'm very sure that in the next edition we are going to have a lot more fun. But at this point, those who are watching us, it's very unfortunate that you're not here. I'm going to have a walk-around session with Mr. Mahama to explore a lot more aspects of the Bright Clay Studios, so that it can help us actually see what we had here really clearly, because it was still on the television. We didn't see it outside. So we have to go out and have a feel of that. Yeah, so we're going to end it here. So if you're a father, encourage your child if you want to do art. Yeah. Encourage your son if it is art they want to pursue, and support them through. Thank you very much.